Welcome to Leader Talks podcast. I'm Reverend Dr. Shannon Carafanta. I am an ordained clergy person in the United Methodist Church.
Hi, I'm Elaine Beattie, speaker, trainer, executive coach.
We've put together this podcast by women for women about things we wish we had known when we were younger.
And we do hope that you will look for our podcast on your favorite platform.
Be sure to subscribe, to like, and to share. We want to thank you for joining us today.
So Shannon, you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Lead Her Talks. I am Elaine Beattie, and I am an executive coach, leadership expert, and speaker. And I am here today with my co-host,
Reverend Dr. Shannon Carafanta. I'm an ordained pastor in the United Methodist Church.
And today we are taking on the topic of executive presence. Executive presence. Now, some of you might hear that and go, ugh. Really? That's probably an old concept.
Yeah, I think when I hear that, I remember what I thought that was when I was in my 20s. And I thought that meant wearing a power suit and, I'm going to date myself, pantyhose and high heels. That was executive presence for females.
Right. So don't turn it off. Don't turn the podcast off because we are not talking about that. Okay. We are talking about a little bit of that, but that is not the point of today's talk. Oftentimes, as an executive coach, I'm talking to clients and they want to ascend to another level. And particularly for women, I see so many opportunities for them to, if you would, improve and claim their executive seat. And when I say that, there is a lot packed in there. I use a framework with my clients: seat, self-discovery, right? Oh, I just lost the E. Oh my goodness. Emotional intelligence. Sorry about that. Emotional intelligence, accountability, and transformation. So I'm going to just start with, in order to, if you would, own your executive presence, I believe it begins with self-discovery. I think leadership in every way begins with self-discovery. We talked about it a little bit in one of our prior sessions. There's so many ways for us to find out who we really are. And I think, as you alluded to in the beginning, executive presence, I have to put on the power suit, this, that, whatever. Well, those were the standards and the environments that were created for us. And we had to walk into that, right? You remember that?
Right.
This is what it was. This is what you had to do. And today, thank God, there's a lot of pushback on that because that's not the entire story. I really believe our executive presence comes from within, comes from a sense of knowing, our confidence, right? Our self-confidence. And we can grow in that in so many ways, but there are so many assessments that we can take that can help us to get there. And I know you as a coach and you being in leadership have had your experiences with different assessments. Which ones do you like? Which ones have you worked with?
So I believe I've taken every single assessment and personality test that there might be. I am a DISC profile consultant, so I usually lean on that one, mostly because it will do a good team report where you can see how your team interacts.
Yes.
I actually use it when I'm doing premarital counseling for the future husband and wife, so that we can kind of go, oh, you see how she does not communicate this way. That will shut her down. Or you see how he really, really likes, X, Y, and Z when he's at home. And so we talk through that. I do like Myers-Briggs. I think that was the first one I ever took. And it started a path of self-discovery with that. A lot of people like Enneagram. I read the Enneagram and went, I'm a 3. I don't need to know the rest, which is, I say that tongue in cheek because it's not very compassionate, but I was like, okay, yeah, that's definitely me. And some of the more comprehensive ones like MMPI, Ocean, I think those are all really, really good. And I think taking more than one is helpful because they each kind of teach a different angle.
Yeah. I agree. And like Reverend Shannon just said, I too have had experience and exposure to many different assessment. The point being, use an assessment, right? Find the one that you like and use it. I too prefer disc because I think it's simple. It gets to the point. I just did a disc review just about an hour ago, right before we actually came to the podcast. And it's enlightening. It is absolutely enlightening. So not only are you finding out information about yourself, but you're finding out who you are with other people. I tell people it's so funny. I used to think I was the nicest person before I got married. Right. In the presence of somebody else, right? And then you find out who you really are. And I say that to say that as we discuss executive presence, we find out who we are when we are being challenged to go to the next level. Would you agree?
I would. I'm curious what you would say about the role of culture, like organizational culture and executive presence. Like if I find out that, I'm a high I and D, but that my communication style is more innovative, yet I'm working at a company that is very detail oriented and really hasn't updated their communications methods in 20 years. How much does culture fit into executive presence?
Yeah, and again, let me just say, before we even step into an organization, yes, we need to know who we are and we need to continually do our own self-development and self-discovery. But it also begins with us understanding who we're partnering with. And I say it partnering with, right? The organization. What are their missions? What are their values? What are they all about? We need to know that from the very beginning. Because if I'm going to be, going to a organization and, they're required, first of all, to show up to work, right? Because we know that that's a big deal today, right? Having to be on site 5 days a week. And I don't want to do that. We've already got like conflict going on, right? But when we talk about executive presence, so am I required to show up on a Zoom call every day? And if so, what's the appropriate attire? Remember back in, the pandemic, people had their Zoom clothes and, and we laugh about it, but there was a way that people expected us to show up. I have a girlfriend, Ann Stills. She has a company called Smashing Daily, and she teaches about executive presence. And what she often says, and I truly believe this too, is that people are already sizing us up the moment they look at us. The moment they look at us. Now, some of you might say, oh, judgy, right? Well, yeah, but we can't help it.
Well, yeah, some of it's instinct. I have to make sure you're safe. So can I see your hands? Because if I can't see your hands, then I might think you have a weapon behind there. I mean, this is really just instinct and evolutionary. Hands kind of show trust, like, oh, I can see what you're doing. And I can tell that you're talking a little with the right gestures and not saying a little, like that there's a difference. You are who you say you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so when people see us, they are already coming to some kind of conclusion. And then as my parents so, emphasize with me, right? Your diction and how you speak and how you, convey and communicate is another way. And today, I think that is the most essential part of executive presence. How do we say what we want to say? How do people feel when they are around us? And I really believe when we up our game in that area, that our presence actually elevates.
Yeah, I had communication down as one of the big things I think with an executive presence. And it's not just when I think communication, I think preaching a sermon or giving a big talk, but it's also in the one-on-ones as well as in smaller team meetings. How do you keep the energy of the team and making sure everyone's heard in different ways? And then one-on-one, Elaine and I always start these podcasts and I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do today. Here's X, Y, and Z. And Elaine's like, how are you? Because Elaine has a very good executive presence. And I'm like, I said an Enneagram 3, right? So I'm going to go, 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 go. But I think that's really, really important. And a lot of people, they don't take time. What would you suggest for someone who wants to get better at that? What are some ways they can help themselves grow in that area.
Yeah, and we've said this over and over, Shannon, and I really believe, we're probably going to come out with a framework, right? By the time we finish this, because that's kind of the girls we are. I know
Mhm.
you have your frameworks and I have mine, but I think we're probably going to end up with one that centers around leader talks because we talk about the same thing. And that is making sure, number one, that we know ourselves, right? That we're leaning into self-development. But two, who are we in community? Like, how do
Mm.
we show up? Right. So getting that feedback, we again talked about this in one of our episodes. And I was thinking about that. You were talking, and I didn't want to interrupt you. But, when we want to know who we are, if we would just go out to our friends, just send out an email. I did this once and say, describe me in 3 words. It's really fascinating to
Yeah.
see how it comes back. I did that. And now this is with my business community. Okay. These are people who don't really know. I don't really always share, like, I'm a woman of God, faith, whatever. But they kept saying spiritual. She's a spiritual person, and I was
Okay.
like, this is interesting that it was, I can't help it. It was like who I am. Right.
Right.
But to your question, I think it is so important for us to be authentic, to be who we are. And this is when I really started stepping into who I was. And it's also what I've seen happen to people around me. And it is also something that I teach to my current clients. It took me years to own who I was as a woman, as an African American woman, as a woman in leadership, as a young leader, right? All that because I would be in the room and people would say, Elaine, don't do that. Elaine, do this. And I'm thinking, what in the world here? And so the messages, right? Am I not good enough? Blah, 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 all that stuff.
Right.
But here's the thing. I was working hard, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, and it wasn't working. I was doing what they said. I was fully assimilating. I was like a puppet. It wasn't working. And then I had this revelation. I had this moment with God, and it's like, I made you perfectly just the way you are.
Mm.
It is image. We're perfect the way we are. Yeah, we all need refinement. But when we own who we are, when we embrace who we are, when we, lean into our strengths and be willing to like make mistakes and learn along the way, just really show up, right? Tell the truth,
Yeah.
tell our stories, let people see who we really are, right? Show a little vulnerability. Our executive presence goes up. Don't you know that your people love when you tell stories, right?
Yeah.
Don't they just love those funny, crazy, like, oh, I totally messed up stories?
Yes, they do. They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, storytelling is it's a big part of communication. It helps our brains to kind of get on that same way. We kind of sync up. We're on the same wavelength when that happens. And you can kind of tell when the room is with you because they'll do like this nod or
Hmm.
they'll look at you. They might tilt their head so their ear is a little closer to you. You can tell.
Or lean in,
Lean
right?
in. Yeah.
Lean in. And so I think it is critical that we create cultures where we are encouraging people to be who they are. That is why we hired them.
Yeah.
We didn't hire them because, well, some people do that, I guess. But we, in my best experience, when we're hiring people and bringing people onto our teams, we need people who are different from us and bring
Mhm.
something special to the party.
Yeah.
So if we've done that and we've done our homework, we should trust the process and trust them that they're going to show up and bring exactly what we need.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
believe when we do that, again, our presence is elevated. Our presence is elevated. So I really believe it's communication. I believe it is part of how we show up. And I'm not saying a suit or whatever. I think we both have a presence about ourselves because it's coming from within, right?
Right.
You and I both have been in this leadership game for 25, 30 years, right?
Right.
We have been there, we've seen it, we've done it. We have supported people, we've led people, thousands, hundreds.
Yeah. So let's get back to clothes for a second.
Sure.
Because I was brought up to believe you should be better dressed than the rest because that will get you noticed more, that will move you up. Like if you dress for the job you want, you'll get the job you want. I will say that I've been in churches that were traditional and contemporary. Contemporary, you don't wear a clergy robe. And in traditional services, typically you do, but there might be for summer or maybe the Sunday after Christmas, maybe you don't wear the robe. But I have always leaned into wearing the robe because I'm a female in ministry. And some people, even the ones that willingly come to the church, still have concerns and questions about a female in leadership. So I always want to wear the robe so that at least they see the executive presence, even if they don't believe it because of something in their past or how they were raised. It also helps me when I put it on, I am reminded of the call. And it's that extra step that, I'm putting my clothes on at home, but like I'm putting the robe on now for worship.
I agree. I think our clothes should send a message. I do believe that. And that doesn't mean, you got to be all black tie, suit tie, whatever. But I believe our clothing sends a message. And depending on what we want to say, it sends a message. Right. You put on that robe and it establishes your authority, right? It establishes your authority. It also takes, away any thoughts of whatever is going on in people's heads and keeps their eyes right on hopefully the word, right?
Right.
And I've heard people say that. When I go to conferences now, they say, you should be dressed like, a little above the people that you're speaking to. I agree with that, right? You don't want to be going in there, in jeans and sandals and all this. I actually saw this and it was so distracting to me. This woman had on some cutoff, they were long shorts, but they were cut off long shorts and a shirt that I don't even know if was really pressed. And I was so distracted. I couldn't hear what she was saying.
Yeah. So, and that kind of brings me back to culture because I immediately think of Steve Jobs and wearing the jeans and the black t-shirt.
Yeah.
How do you know when you're supposed to lean into that versus something else?
Yeah. Again, I would ask those questions in the interview process, right? Or, have conversations with my boss and or HR. I remember one time my boss, now I've always been on the conservative side. I've just been a classic kind of girl. My mother just said, if you wear blues and browns and, whatever, you'll always be safe. Right. So,
right.
And I like it. And I like it. It's just my style. I love colors too. Right. So I wear colors. But the point I'm making here is that, I go to, this is back in the days, like back in the 90s, right? And I have on a suit, skirt, top. My top might have been like, I don't know, a little t-shirt top, a little round neck t-shirt top, whatever. I get in a performance review and my boss says to me, Elaine, you really need to stop wearing those t-shirts. Taking it back. I thought, first of all, why are you waiting to tell me this in a performance review when our offices are right next door? Why don't you say, why are you wearing that shirt? Right. But there was nothing wrong with the shirt, but it was her belief because she was one of those who wore like
the little ties,
yeah. And I just had on a little round neck t-shirt underneath a suit. So people have all kinds of thoughts about, clothing and what it should look like. The point here is to wear what makes you comfortable. But check out what the culture is because you may not fit in and you'll always kind of feel like the odd man out. Everything about the culture you should align with.
I noticed recently, my husband works for Coca-Cola and I went to go visit for lunch one day a few weeks ago. And I noticed that there's been a shift in the dress code at Coca-Cola. It used to be, business casual was some slacks, not jeans. Maybe in the hot summer, a golf shirt. But I was seeing jeans and sweatshirts and was kind of shocked that their CEO recently, they have a new CEO or new-ish. And, the first board meeting he came in with jeans and a t-shirt on, I think with a jacket. So it was, a little bit different. And he didn't have a Coke in that boardroom. Like that was a big thing. I think he had one of their water brands, but he was like, people of different generations do things differently. And we have to realize that if we're going to be marketing to different generations. And so people just started, well, if my CEO is casual, then I'm going to be casual too. And I think that says a lot about what you started with. Executive presence comes from within. And I can't tell you that that CEO always dressed that casually. He probably at one time might have worn a suit, but when he got to a certain point, he could begin to become, once people saw the authenticity in him, they probably saw the credibility, and over time that executive presence grew for other people to see it within him, but for him to see it within himself as well.
Right. And I want to take it a step further. I believe that it's not just about executive presence, it's about the brand. And I know that might sound, very corporate, but Shannon, you have a brand.
Yes.
Have a brand. I have a brand. We over the years have developed who we are. If you really are around Reverend Carafonda, she is fun. She is kind of wacky a little bit. Like I met her around Christmas time. This was the Christmas girl. Okay. I mean,
What was I wearing? I had to have been wearing something crazy.
Yeah, you had on like this Christmas like present dress with like red stockings. I mean, it was like really fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds right.
Yeah, exactly. And so all I'm saying again is that decide who you are and dress and present yourself in that way. Now, I talked about communication and I talked about oral. There's also our presence in writing. There is our presence in silence and just being present, as you know, right? That often happens in ministry. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can share and teach people about executive presence. And it goes so far beyond clothing. But know that clothing does have its place in people making an assumption about who we are.
Right.
And as you so noted in the church, the truth of the matter is there are systems in place that have not been broken, even though they are not said. And I'm saying this purposely. There are unwritten rules about things. And I'm suggesting that we all should have a mentor that we can go to and say, is this what I'm seeing? Or is there something else?
Yeah.
You might be trying to figure out like why you're not getting ahead, and it could be something as subtle as an unwritten rule.
Right. My son and I were recently at our denominational annual conference, and he was a delegate, and he said, "It seems like people are somewhat casual at this. Can I wear a hat?" And I said, "Yes, during the session, but not during worship." Now it's in the same place and nobody changes clothes in between. And he said, "Well, that doesn't make any sense." And I said, there are certain generations that wearing a hat during a worship service is disrespectful. It's kind of like keeping it on when the national anthem is being sung. And so he opted to not wear it at all. But it was a conversation about an unwritten rule that I'd never taught him. But he sensed that that was probably the case. And he wanted to know that is that just in the sanctuary? If I'm coming for another event, can I wear a hat? Like where does this go? And I said, probably in a few generations, that may not be a thing. We'll see.
Thank you for that, because my husband would have loved you sharing that with him, because he is all about that, right? Like he is all about taking the hat off. Ladies, gentlemen, if you're listening, I'm suggesting that authenticity is the essence of our executive presence.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Elaine. Coach Elaine, you've been great. This has been insightful and I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. All right. Please join us again. We look forward to just sharing our lessons learned. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.